Good afternoon, everybody. This is the afternoon session of the Portland City Council on April 11th, 2018. Carla, please call the roll.
Bish.
Here.
Saltzman. Udaly.
Here.
Fritz.
Here.
Wheeler.
Here.
Welcome to the Portland City Council. The City Council represents all Portlanders and meets to do the city's business. The presiding officer preserves order and decorum during City Council meetings so everyone can feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe. To participate in council meetings, you may sign up in advance with the council clerk's office for communications to briefly speak about any subject. You may also sign up for public testimony on resolutions or the first readings of ordinances. Your testimony should address the matter being considered at the time. When testifying, please state your name for the record. Your address is not necessary. Please disclose if you are a lobbyist. If you are representing an organization, please identify it. The presiding officer determines the length of testimony. Individuals generally have 3 minutes to testify unless otherwise stated. When you have 30 seconds left, a yellow light goes on. When your time is done, a red light goes on. If you are in the audience and would like to show your support for something that is said, please feel to do a thumbs up. If you want to express that you do not support something, please feel free to do a thumbs down. Disruptive conduct such as shouting or interrupting testimony or council deliberations will not be allowed. I suppose unless you're under the age of 1, and then it's fine.
Doesn't apply to babies.
If there are disruptions, a warning will be given that further disruption may result in the person being ejected for the remainder of the meeting. After being ejected, the person who fails to leave the meeting is subject to arrest for trespass. Thank you for helping your fellow Portlanders feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe.
Thank you. Carla, could you please read the first item?
Item 347, proclaim April 2018 to be Fair Housing Month.
Colleagues, 50 years ago, the 1968 Civil Rights Act, commonly known as the Fair Housing Act of 1968, was signed into law. This monumental legislation prohibited housing discrimination based on race, color, or national origin. Draped in the backdrop of the assassination of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., this legislation was part of a suite of legislation that was attached to a broader civil rights movement to address the inequities that many Americans faced. This focus on fair housing is especially important as we've seen a national dialogue aimed at weakening the protections that many have counted on to increase housing opportunities in America, which is why I am very proud that we as a city are gathered here today to proclaim April Fair Housing Month. We recognize the profound importance of this legislation and how this blueprint legislation serves as a guide and as a model as we advance towards our collective future. It's our responsibility to create a forum for the voices of those who have the least access to power, to those who are the most impacted by the limitations of our society. And I'm happy that we're spending sufficient time hearing how this law has impacted their opportunities and the efforts we've enacted and those we must maintain to have a truly functioning and equitable Portland. So today I'm proud to share the Fair Housing Proclamation, to hear the history of the Fair Housing Act, to engage with the various speakers this afternoon, and to honor the history and the future of this legislation. It's now my honor to read the proclamation. Whereas the Fair Housing Act, enacted on April 11th, 1968, was adopted to prohibit discriminatory housing practices, undo racial segregation patterns, and provide equal access to housing opportunity for all. And whereas in Portland, the combined federal, state, and civil rights laws protect people from housing discrimination based on race, color, national origin, religion, gender, familial status, disability, marital status, sexual orientation, source of income, including housing assistance, military status, gender identity, ethnicity, or history of domestic violence, stalking, or sexual assault. And whereas, despite these legal protections, Portland has not yet succeeded in providing equitable access to opportunity or removing the patterns of racial segregation that persist in housing, employment, education, and all other institutions. And whereas Executive Order 12892 calls on government to affirmatively further fair housing by addressing and removing barriers to housing choice in all federal programs, policies, plans, resources, and activities. And whereas the City of Portland, as a recipient of federal funding, extends to all of its bureaus the obligation to understand which communities experience barriers to housing choice and why, dedicate resources to meaningfully addressing those disparities, and measure the impacts of these actions to all of its bureaus. And whereas April 11th, 2018 marks the 50th anniversary of the signing of Title VIII of the Federal Civil Rights Act, the Federal Fair Housing Act of 1968, and the 30th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act amendments of 1988. Now, therefore, I, Ted Wheeler, Mayor of the City of Portland, Oregon, the City of Roses, do hereby proclaim April 2018 to be Fair Housing Month in the City of Portland and encourage all residents to observe this month. Colleagues, I've been informed that Commissioner Fish, who has a long history in housing and fair housing in particular, has some words to add. Commissioner Fish.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and welcome everybody to this gathering. As the Mayor noted in his remarks, the 1960s produced three great civil rights laws: the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the Fair Housing Act of 1968. The Fair Housing Act addressed the legacy of discrimination in housing. It focused on explicit discrimination, like redlining in federal mortgage insurance and restrictive covenants in real estate contracts. But it also addressed more subtle forms of discrimination, like real estate agents steering minorities to particular neighborhoods, biased lending and underwriting, and concentrating poverty in certain zip codes. The Fair Housing Act was blocked and filibustered for many years. Dr. King's assassination on April 4th, 1968 proved decisive and forced action by the Congress. Now, the Fair Housing Act had champions from both parties. Remember those days? Its main goal was integrating neighborhoods and ending bias. But the original act proved to be a toothless tiger. It took the Fair Housing Act amendments of 1988 to strengthen the law and to expand its reach. The amendments prohibited discrimination based on familial status and disability, established new administrative enforcement mechanisms, and expanded the jurisdiction of the Justice Department to sue on behalf of victims in federal court. My father played a key role in brokering the compromise that allowed the amendments to become law. When President Reagan signed the bill into law at a White House ceremony on September 13th, 1988, he gave my dad one of the pens that he used. I brought the pen with me today. Despite the laudable intentions of the Fair Housing Act, enforcement has been slow and uneven. Recently, the Trump administration put the brakes on a 2015 executive rule that requires recipients of federal housing dollars, as the mayor indicated, to affirmatively further fair housing. HUD Secretary Dr. Ben Carson went one step further, dismissing the rule as, quote, social engineering. Mayor and colleagues, I am so proud that we are taking the time today to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act. While we have made progress as a country, there is more work to be done to reach our shared goal of a fairer, more integrated nation. Now, Mayor, you're going to issue the proclamation and it is your tradition to sign it. I wonder if you could, in a ceremonial way, sign the proclamation with the pen used by President Reagan. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I'll be checking eBay tonight. Thank you, Mayor.
There it is, folks. Folks, we have now Jason Trombley to make remarks on behalf of the Fair Housing Advisory Commission.
Mayor, Commissioners, I wanted to introduce Jason Trombley. He has been our chair of the Fair Housing Advocacy Committee since 2014. Jason has been, Shannon,
could you introduce yourself, please?
I'm sorry, Shannon Callahan of the Portland Housing Bureau. Jason is a public relations professional and education advocate who has represented the Coalition of Communities of Color on the Fair Housing Advocacy Committee, and we are grateful for his guidance and his leadership. In his capacity with the Coalition of Communities of Color, he has helped develop strategic plans around economic development and education. In addition to his work on the Fair Housing Advocacy Committee, he has staunchly supported Portland Public Schools' racial equity work, including the Achievement Compact Advisory Committee, the Superintendent's Advisory Committee on Enrollment and Transfer, and most recently, he led the commission to address school boundary changes, program locations, and grade configuration changes for Portland Public. Outside of all of this, he is also the coach, and has been for 12 years, of the 6-time national champion Lincoln High School Constitution team. And he is a board chair of Mission Citizen, the nonprofit funded and managed by his own students, which helps to work with immigrants in Washington and Multnomah counties to become U.S. citizens. So he does a lot, and he does a lot for the Fair Housing Advocacy Committee, and we wanted to acknowledge and thank him for that today. So it is my privilege to introduce Jason.
Thank you, Shannon. Good afternoon, all.
Good afternoon.
Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners, as today marks the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Fair Housing Act, I'm here to help share how the Fair Housing Advocacy Committee, or FHAC, helps to play a role in applying the Act in the region. As part of the analysis of impediments to fair housing, or AI report, required by HUD, or also known as the City of Portland, Gresham, and Multnomah County 2011 Fair Housing Plan, an analysis of impediments to fair housing choice and the strategies to address them, or also known as the Fair Housing Plan, the City of Portland, on behalf of its jurisdictional partners, was tasked with collecting and analyzing data that identifies barriers to housing choice, and with developing a report that outlines strategies to mitigate the identified barriers. In order to bring knowledgeable community voices into the preparation of the Portland and its consortium partners, Multnomah County, the City of Portland, and the City of Gresham, convened the Analysis of Impediments Committee, or AI Committee, to recommend and review research data and make recommendations on strategies to remove barriers to housing choice. The resulting Fair Housing Plan identified a number of key barriers to exercising housing choice, including a general lack of understanding by housing consumers and housing providers of fair housing law, as well as the need for a clear, focused fair housing champion. In response, the AI Committee suggested creating a Fair Housing Advocacy Committee that meets at least quarterly to focus on the implementation of fair housing strategies and to be a strong advocate voice in Multnomah County. The purpose of the Fair Housing Advocacy Committee, as recommended in the Fair Housing Plan, is to provide a strong advocate voice in Multnomah County for the implementation and recommendations in the plan. FHAC will also work to hold its jurisdictional partners of Multnomah County accountable for their actions under the plan. And FHAC looks forward to also supporting the work under the next assessment of fair housing in advance of the next 5-year consolidated plan. So that's just a short overview of the role of FHAC and its work over the past several years. And to kind of share some broader context, I'd like to invite some of our community partners who've been a part of this work since its beginning. So first up, I'd like to invite Alan Lazo, who's the Executive Director of the Fair Housing Council of Oregon, Christina Dirks, Attorney for Legal Aid Services of Oregon, and Matt Saris from Disability Rights Oregon.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let me get my stuff out here. All right, so I'm going to back up a little bit and talk about the history of the Fair Housing Act and the times in which that was passed. So good afternoon, Mayor, members of City Council. It truly is wonderful for me to be here with you this afternoon, and I was with some of you earlier this morning. You know, this is one of my favorite days to come to Council and bring these young student artists with us, so we're going to get to that a little bit later. But really, we're here to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the passage of the Federal Fair Housing Act, that landmark civil rights legislation intent on ending deeply rooted racial discrimination and segregation. Riots in more than 150 cities across the country during that long, hot summer of 1967 prompted President Lyndon Johnson to convene the Kerner Commission later that year. The commission famously concluded at that time, quote, "Our nation is moving toward two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal." The commission's views on housing followed the lead of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who gave rise to the open housing movement with his work in Chicago a year earlier. The Kerner Commission went on to call for opening up opportunities to those who are restricted by racial segregation and discrimination and eliminating all barriers to their choice of jobs, education, and housing. The commission recommended that the federal government enact a comprehensive and enforceable federal open housing law to cover the sale or rental of all housing. The Fair Housing Act, which had been the last major civil rights legislation to pass, became that comprehensive and enforceable federal open housing law on April 11th, 1968, a week after Dr. King's assassination. This original act prohibited discrimination in the sale or rental of housing on the basis of race, color, religion, and national origin, and as we heard earlier, sex, meaning gender, was added as a protected class in 1974, and disability and familial status, meaning families with children under the age of 18, were added in 1988. Despite civil rights progress over the past 50 years that have led to gains in educational attainment among other areas, there remains a persistent lack of progress on many of the issues that prompted the creation of the original Fair Housing Act. A 2015 study published in the American Sociological Review indicated that, quote, "segregation is manifesting itself in other ways, not disappearing." The study notes that while black-white segregation is declining and areas no longer are divided into black cities and white suburbs, segregation between places, for instance, between city and suburb and suburb and suburb, may be increasing, even as overall metro neighborhood segregation declines. We know that here in Portland, that displacement out of the core of our city due to housing affordability continues to deny opportunities for communities of color, single mother-headed households, and people with disabilities, denying these groups the opportunity to fully realize all of the benefits of our community. The home ownership rate for blacks has remained virtually unchanged since 1968, at approximately 40%, 30 points lower than it is for whites today. And that holds true right here in Portland. According to the Portland Housing Bureau's 2016 State of Housing Report, white households are roughly 54 to 57% homeowners, while African Americans, Native Americans, and Hawaiian Pacific Islander households own homes at a rate of roughly 27%. 50 years after the passage of the Fair Housing Act, we must acknowledge the persistent impacts of historical housing discrimination and segregation right here in Portland. 50 years after the passage of the Fair Housing Act, our work in the fair housing movement is far from done. In preparing for the 50th anniversary, I've done a lot of research in preparing for this momentous commemoration. And there's been this almost universal theme in headlines around coverage of the 50th anniversary. I'm talking about the unfulfilled promise or the failure of the Fair Housing Act. Former Vice President Walter Mondale, a co-author of the 1968 Act, called the Fair Housing Act, quote, "the most contested, most ignored, and at times most misunderstood of the civil rights laws of that era. So this is a time more than ever when we must recommit to the ideals of the fair housing movement, the ideal of open and inclusive communities. We all have a great deal at stake. The future of our community is literally at stake in this work that we all do together. We know that integrated and inclusive communities produce better outcomes for our children and are more prosperous overall. Commemorating the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act reminds us that we have a history that divides us. But it must be our shared commitment to Dr. King's dream of creating a community open and inclusive to all that unites us. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners, for providing us the opportunity to celebrate and reflect on the importance of the Fair Housing Act. My name is Christina Dirks. I'm an attorney with Legal Aid Services of Oregon. Within the last 50 years, we have most definitely seen how discriminatory housing practices have changed and evolved with the times. We continue to see blatant forms of discrimination. However, we more frequently see subtle and equally pernicious discrimination. It's our duty to be responsive to these changes and challenge ourselves to think creatively about how we enforce these laws. In an effort to highlight some of the fair housing trends that we are seeing at Legal Aid Services, I thought I would highlight a few of our recent cases. One trend we are seeing is the intersectional forms of discrimination that tenants face when they are members of multiple protected classes. An example is that LASSO recently successfully settled a claim of a tenant with a Section 8 voucher who was discriminated against when she was applying for housing. While viewing an apartment, the manager both subtly and overtly discouraged her from applying based on the tenant's race. When the manager later learned that the client had a Section 8 voucher, the manager proceeded to make disparaging comments about Section 8 voucher holders and flatly rejected the tenant's application. Another issue we are seeing is how members of protected classes are subjected to substandard housing. LASSO recently represented a family of color who utilized a Section 8 voucher as well. The family suffered repeated substantial habitability violations and source of income discrimination from the on-site manager in the form of delayed responses to repair requests and retaliation for refusing to lie about the condition of the apartment to the inspector from the housing authority. Yet another trend is housing providers' failure to address tenant-on-tenant discriminatory harassment. We're currently representing a tenant who was subjected to ongoing racial and gender-based harassment from her neighbor. Her landlord did nothing to resolve the issue and in fact went so far as to accuse our neighbor of being racist for complaining about the neighbor's racist harassment. An additional trend is housing providers granting reasonable accommodations in name only but not in substance. We are repeatedly seeing in the eviction context that unrepresented tenants are being told their reasonable accommodation request is being granted. However, they are still being forced to enter into agreements where they are required to move and vacate from their unit. One case came to us after the tenant failed to move out under the terms of an agreement. He had made a request for a reasonable accommodation to stay in his housing in order to obtain treatment and maintain housing. The landlord said they were granting the request and would give him 2 additional weeks to move. We were able to immediately file a request for a hearing, get back into court, and negotiate a new agreement that allowed the tenant to stay in their housing and obtain the vital treatment they needed in order to maintain their sobriety. Finally, I would be remiss if I did not underline how the housing crisis today in Portland is the most pressing fair housing issue that we face. Through numerous cases that LASSO has handled representing large number of tenants in building-wide displacements or exorbitant rent increases, we have seen how the housing crisis is resulting in the wholesale displacement of communities of color. Through these cases, we have also seen how the housing crisis is reinforcing familiar patterns of housing segregation. In addition, landlords are utilizing more stringent screening criteria that make it nearly impossible for communities of color and individuals with disabilities to live anywhere in our city. This is an area ripe for disparate impact litigation. The obligation of the Fair Housing Act to command that equity and fair housing be at the center of any analysis of policy initiatives aimed at addressing the housing crisis. We owe this to every member of our protected classes in our city. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Mayor, Commissioners, thank you for inviting this testimony today. As we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act, for persons with disabilities, it is the 30th anniversary of fair housing. Congress expanded the Fair Housing Act to protect people with disabilities in 1988. Today in the U.S., nearly 20% of people live with a disability. Today, over half of all fair housing complaints involve disability discrimination. As a housing attorney at Disability Rights Oregon, I see the positive impact that the Fair Housing Act has on Oregonians with disabilities. Reasonable accommodations under the Fair Housing Act empower persons with disabilities to access our community and all its opportunities. The Fair Housing Act is for veterans returning home with mental or physical wounds, that they may have a companion animal to provide emotional support, or a service animal to perform tasks of daily living. The Fair Housing Act is for tenants in public housing who need a live-in caregiver, that they may reside with their caregiver despite the restrictions in public housing. The Fair Housing Act is for elders with crippling arthritis who face challenges moving safely within their homes, that they may install the assistive devices necessary to avoid injuries and maintain independence. It is for the family whose child manifests an emerging emotional or behavioral disorder, that they do not live in fear of eviction due to their child's behaviors as they develop a plan to manage those symptoms. It is for the person with lung disease or using a wheelchair whose journey from the front door to their car has become a barrier to leaving home, that they may have access to ramps, curb cuts, and designated parking spots necessary to participate in community life. It is for the person with the disability living in poverty who relies on the Section 8 voucher, but for whom it is hard to find affordable, accessible housing, that they may have extra time to find a home before their voucher expires. The Fair Housing Act is for leaders of government, that they use it as a touchstone to guide housing policies that provide greater equity and inclusion. In 1988, the Fair Housing Act was expanded to include persons with disabilities. As we consider the future, let us imagine the ways we can extend its principles to help more people and tackle new challenges. Challenges like how to develop the Broadway Corridor Project, how to balance landlord and tenant rights, how to step up local enforcement efforts to stop discrimination and tear down barriers to accessibility. In responding to those challenges, let us listen to the disabled community. Disability touches everyone. It is a status that any of us may come to share. It can arise unexpectedly in our lives or in the lives of those we love. No matter what life has in store for us, the protections of the Fair Housing Act are for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And Matt, just for the record, that was such great testimony. Could you say your name and your position for the record?
Yes, my name is Matthew Sears. I'm from Disability Rights Oregon, and I'm a housing attorney.
Thank you, all of you. I appreciate it very much.
All right. So I'd like to invite to the dais our next three presenters. Young Ho from the Community Alliance of Tenants, Sumitra Chetri, who is the Community Engagement Program Coordinator with IRCO's Asian Family Center, and Dolores Burgos from NIA.
Good afternoon. Welcome, and thank you for being here.
Hello, thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners, Mayor, Commissioners. My name is Young, and I am the Education Program Director at Community Alliance of Tenants. Thank you so much for having us all here today to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the passage of the Fair Housing Act, and we are excited to celebrate it through the month of April as well. I have been at CAT for over 8 years, and in that time, I have spoken with many tenants who have been mistreated. We work with and advocate for the most vulnerable members of the community, low-income tenants, immigrants, and refugees, people with disabilities, and families. Many of these people are part of the protected classes under the Fair Housing Council, the Fair Housing Act. Every week, our renters' rights hotline specialists counsel tenants whose rights have been violated under the Fair Housing Act. And we refer them to the Fair Housing Council, as well as many of the resources from people who have just spoken today. through the Tenant Protections Team program, which is a partnership with culturally specific organizations. IRCO, SEI, and APANO, our education coordinators work with tenants one-on-one to help them advocate for their rights and amplify their often silenced voices. These tenants often struggle to find and keep affordable housing, facing housing discrimination against families and recent immigrants. My colleague at Immigrant and Refugee Community Organization, Sumitra, will be sharing a story from her community. The tenant story is one small victory among many tenant stories that are not successful because the others were not able to understand how to find resources. They felt fearful of retaliation and couldn't risk losing their home. Their family was able to connect to our resources and services and learn and assert their rights with our support. With our help, the family has been able to share their story, and in turn, they have encouraged other Bhutanese community members to speak up and about their housing situation, the discrimination and intimidation. And with that, I welcome Sumitra from IRCO to share Ganesh's story.
Thank you.
Hello, just for the record, my name is Sumitra. I'm a program coordinator with IRCO. I'm glad to be here sharing a happy story today. So one of the clients that is from Bhutanese community, his name is Ganesh, and he's the head of household. He works, 2 jobs to just put food in the table. And Ganesh's family came to United States as a Bhutanese refugee immigrant, and Ganesh's family lived in an apartment for several years after moving, and they moved to different apartment. After moving to new apartment, Ganesh got a letter from previous apartment manager saying that Ganesh will not be getting his deposit back, and Ganesh will have to pay more money, and if not, the manager will report to the credit. Because of limited English, Ganesh did not understand what was in the letter. Ganesh was able to connect with CAT service by IRCO case manager and able to get support from CAT service. Daisy, CAT housing program coordinator, supported Ganesh to write a letter to the manager, also filed a claim. Ganesh was able to get his deposit back, and his credit is good now. Ganesh was, now encouraged to share his story to other community members, and they're encouraged to speak up when things like that happen in the community.
Thank you. That is a positive story, and thank you for your great work on that.
Very positive story.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners. My name is Dolores Burgos. I am from the Native American Youth and Family Center. I am the Housing and Energy Services Program Manager. And I just wanted to touch on some of the community's issues about discrimination as far as housing goes. The current fair housing laws are indeed fair, but neither equitable nor exclusive. Current fair housing laws conform to a faulty standard which assumes that all ethnicities and classes are given the exact same opportunities and have gone through life with the same privileges. One of the communities which the communities of colors have endured the steepest levels of housing discriminations. Our community has faced not only housing discrimination itself, but has endured weighted scales which bar the community from many programs which seek to specifically address housing barriers and permanent placement. Current tools for assessing housing support eligibility are ineffective and are not culturally responsive. Screening questions are worded in language from a white business perspective and impose inherent value judgments in the way they are asked. Programs require their participants to meet the federal definition of homelessness, thus bearing Native community members to do communal culture where community members may be doubled up with friends or family. Indeed, it has been observed that information management database reports show that the community-wide effort to fight homelessness simply does not know much about the Native American community. Assessment tools give a profound lack of regard for any community member's specific tribe, and HUD has grouped the community together as all Native American, American Indian, and Alaska Natives. There is no regard for those who are enrolled in a tribe, as well as whether or not a tribe is federally recognized. The Native American community faces discrimination not in merely gaining access to supportive housing services, but also from landlords and property managers. Native clients whom NAIA serves have disclosed potential landlords frequently asking about their Indian last name as one of their first questions. This question would be not asked by somebody with the last name of Smith or Johnson. Native community members face challenges such as these, as well as unwarranted assumptions from landlords of loud partying habits and frequent foot traffic. These faulty assumptions from a white nationalist perspective are not acceptable and do not address the fact that our community is becoming more and more diverse and is becoming more exclusive than the white standards previously set by landlords and rental application screening criteria. Factors as this, when combined with hoops community members must jump through in order to receive support and get approved for rental units, are neither equitable nor inclusive. These discriminatory practices only further the gap between communities of color and white Americans. Though the laws in the place are currently fair, fairness assumes that every single person already comes to the table with the same amount of support systems, financial security, and opportunities. These laws are not inclusive of our ever-changing community and do not prevent landlords from practicing their biases against the Native community. And on that note, we are very, very proud that we have come this far as fair housing. I know that we need to do a lot more work, and I'm just overwhelmed, I'm sorry. And we appreciate the city's help, the state's help, partner agencies in fighting the fight so that we could all be just treated as equal. Thanks.
Thank you, and we appreciate your great work. Thank you for being here.
All right, next up, we have Patricia Rojas, who's the director of El Programa Hispano, and she has a few guests she'd like to bring up as well.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor and councilors. Thanks so much for making the time to have this important beginning of an important conversation remembering 1968 Fair Housing Act. My name is Patricia Rojas, for the record, Executive Director of El Programa Hispano Católico. And even though the Fair Housing Act clearly stated what the ambitions were, what the laws should be, we have a long way to go towards implementing those laws equitably and across the board, across communities in this country. And one of the things that we continue to see in our community is discrimination in housing based on race, ethnicity, nationality, and even language. And I, as executive director, I can speak with you at any time. I think I feel comfortable reaching out to you and speaking with you more and personally about what we can do about that. I do feel like we need to have regulatory bodies and mechanisms to hold landlords accountable. But I think it's more important that today you hear examples of what we're seeing in our community every day. So we have invited some guests to come share their experiences, and I want to first of all thank them for being here. There was no interpreter present today, so I'm going to interpret for them, but next time we should have interpreters present so that all community members can participate in important events like this.
Agreed. Thank you.
Okay, ¿quién quiere hablar primero? Ok, puede traer el micrófono y acuérdate de hablar frases cortas. Y puede empezar con su nombre.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon.
Mi nombre es Zaida.
My name is Zaida
Villatoro.
Villatoro.
Hace unos años yo vivía, o vivo en Portland. Vivía en unos apartamentos y luego yo fui a Tillamook.
So I've been living in Portland for a few years in some apartments, and then after that I went to Tillamook.
Cuando yo regresé, la manager me dice, ya no puedes estar en la aplicación, te voy a quitar.
So when I came back, the manager told me, you can no longer be on the lease. I'm going to remove you.
Y le digo, ¿por qué? Si el apartamento se está pagando. Y dice, no importa.
And I asked why. I'm paying my rent. She says, it doesn't matter.
Entonces yo fui a otro lugar y se quedó otro mi compañero rentando.
And so I then went to a different place, and a friend of mine remained renting.
Y yo quería regresar y él fue a decirle que yo iba a regresar.
And so I wanted to return, and he went to tell her that I wanted to return.
Y cuando él le fue a decir, ella le dijo, si regresas te voy a sacar también a ti.
And so when he did, she told him, if she comes back, then I'm gonna have you leave as well. So her friend now, two people facing potential displacement.
Hay muchas personas en esos apartamentos que sufren mucho racismo por ella.
There are a lot of people in that apartment complex that suffer racism because of that person.
Actualmente también estoy viviendo cerca y la manager no me quiere dar parqueadero.
And now I'm living at another apartment complex nearby, and the manager doesn't want to give me a parking spot.
Que tenemos que tener licencia para que me dé el parqueadero.
Because I have to have a driver's license to have a parking spot.
También le regalaron un perrito a mi hijo y me dijo que tenía que tener la licencia.
And I need to clarify, ¿licencia de qué?
Del perro también.
Oh, okay. And so my son was given a puppy, and the manager said I needed to have a license to be a pet owner or a license for that as well.
Empezamos a buscar donde daban la licencia y yo le fui, le dije que estoy en proceso de buscar la licencia y ella me dijo que no, me fue a dejar un papel que el 17 yo tenía que desocupar porque no tenía la licencia del perro.
And so I told her that I was out looking for where I could find this license, and she said, no, you're going to be evicted on the 17th.
Tuvimos que regresar el perro donde no lo regalaron.
And so we gave the dog back. That is all.
Sorry to hear that. Thank you for sharing your story. Gracias.
Gracias por compartir su historia.
De nada.
¿Puede traer el micrófono y se puede presentar empezando con su nombre, por favor?
Sí. Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Lorena Galindo y soy beneficiada del programa hispano.
So, good afternoon. My name is Lorena Galindo, and I'm a client of el programa hispano.
Llegué a la ciudad de Portland hace más o menos año y medio.
I came to Portland about a year and a half ago.
Entonces quiero hablar de las dificultades que fueron bastantes con las que me enfrenté durante el proceso en la búsqueda de vivienda.
So I'd like to speak to the challenges that I have faced in terms of finding housing.
La primera barrera que se me presentó en ese proceso fue cuando yo llegaba a llenar una aplicación. Entonces, el primer requisito es un número de seguro social. Sin saber exactamente qué restricciones tenían, yo llenaba la aplicación, la entregué en 2 ocasiones, entonces me la regresaron y me dijeron que no podía procesarse porque simplemente no cumplía con el requisito.
So the first barrier that I faced was in simply applying, and without knowing, I applied, and they had a requirement that you have to provide a social security number. And I didn't know, and I filled out 2 different applications, and both were declined or denied because I didn't have a social security number, and I did not know that this was part of the process.
Sabía que era difícil porque no soy la única persona que le había sucedido, entonces aún así pues tenía la necesidad de encontrar un lugar donde vivir, así que un conocido de un familiar me recomendó con alguien que tenía apartamentos, que era igual que yo, hispano. El señor me dio la oportunidad, Llené la aplicación, sabía que yo no hablaba inglés, que yo no tenía el seguro social. Sin embargo, me dio la oportunidad.
Un momento, señora, déjeme interpretar esa parte. Perdón que le interrumpa. I needed to find housing nonetheless, and so I spoke with a friend of mine who knew a landlord, and I went ahead and applied, and he knew that I didn't speak English and that I didn't have the documentation.
A los 2 días más o menos de que me había confirmado que yo podía rentar, me dijo siempre no, porque hay una persona que sí tiene los requisitos, entonces vas a esperar. Si hay un espacio para ti, bueno, y si no, lo siento.
And then they called me a couple of days later saying, yes, we accept your application. However, we're going to make you wait because there's somebody else that does have all of their documentation, and we'll call you if something opens up.
Y pues de mi parte es todo. Mi testimonio nada más es para hablar de lo que pasa realmente y no de lo que dice la ley como debería ser. Gracias.
That is all. I wanted to share my testimony about what really happens and not what the law says. Thank you.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Hi, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Yadira, and I'm here today because I want to tell you about my rental history, not only here in Multnomah County, but also in Marion County. I have a disabled daughter, and at that time I was pregnant, so I couldn't work. We needed a place to live, and we couldn't find one here, so we went to Marion, and they told us that they wouldn't rent to us because I wasn't working in the agricultural work, but my husband was, and he's undocumented, so they wouldn't give us our apartment. I had to go through a lot of processes and doctor's notes for them to give us that apartment. They kicked us out because I wasn't able to find a work in the agriculture because my daughter has heart issues and brain conditions. So they kicked us out. We came over here to Multnomah County trying to find a place to rent for my daughters and for ourselves. And we encountered a very racist manager. She called my husband illegal. She screamed and cussed at me. And it's just been a very hard road to find rental assistance that would, or should I say rental apartments, that would accept my husband's status without me being the head of household. And I'm very thankful that you guys had a chance to listen to me.
Thank you. We appreciate your being here to share your story. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I just want, while we have a pause, I also want to acknowledge that we have a very esteemed elected official in the room with us today, State Representative Alyssa Kenny-Geyer. She was here this morning for our Fair Housing Act commemorative breakfast, and she's here this afternoon, and I just wanted to acknowledge her presence. We're glad to have you here. Thank you.
Our next two speakers are Deborah Imza from Multifamily Northwest and Betty Dominguez of Home Forward. And I know Betty also has a few guest speakers as well. So.
Great.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm Deborah Imze, Executive Vice President for Multifamily Northwest, which is a trade association, and we represent over 200,000 units in the state of Oregon. I've also been a member of the Fair Housing Advocacy Committee since its inception. Several years ago, when Section 8 vouchers were made part of the protected classes for source of income in the state of Oregon, the Myers Memorial Trust awarded legal aid Northwest Public Affairs and Multifamily Northwest a grant to educate landlords on the changes in the law. Later, when the Supreme Court upheld the concept of disparate impact, the group was awarded a second grant to educate landlords on the concept and the fact that a facially neutral screening policy can have a disproportionate impact on a protected class. Recently, the same group has been awarded a third two-year grant. We will spend the first year researching alternative screening criteria other than criminal and credit. The second year, we will reach out to landlords across the state with the results of our work. I am pleased to be celebrating the 50th anniversary of the enactment of the Fair Housing Act by working collaboratively with the housing authorities and legal aid to look at screening alternatives that protect the community but are successful in providing housing opportunities for those in our communities with barriers. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. We really appreciate your being here. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners, I'm Betty Dominguez. I'm a director at Home Forward. I've also been a longtime sitting member of the Fair Housing Advocacy Committee, and I'm proud to say newly appointed Metro Councilor. Before we begin, I did want to just have a personal note. As a Latina woman growing up in the late 50s, early 60s in San Diego, I experienced racial prejudice and name-calling that no child should have to hear. And so this particular event, this 50th anniversary of this act, is very personally significant and special to me. But I'm not here to talk about me. I'm here to introduce you to some very, very special people. Nearly 1/3 of the U.S. population has a criminal record of some sort. While persons with criminal records are not a protected class under the Act, data shows that criminal history-based barriers to housing have a disproportionate impact on persons of color and other marginalized communities, which are protected classes under the Act. Criminal records have a long-term collateral consequence as they create a barrier to access housing as well as education and employment. In 2016, Home Forward and Metropolitan Public Defenders partnered to begin the Record Relief and Expungement Program to increase resident access to legal assistance to alleviate barriers related to past criminal history. In this program, Metropolitan Public Defenders provides free legal assistance to Home Forward residents and participants. Almost 1,000 individuals since the inception of the program have been served, and we're here to introduce two of them to you today. To my immediate, what is this, my right? Yes. We have Sherelle. Sherelle and her 3 children live in one of Home Forward's public housing communities. She began engaging in the Record Relief and Expungement Partnership 1 year ago when her criminal record from her past was impacting her ability to meet her housing and economic goals. Sherelle, thank you for your time today and your willingness to tell your story.
First, I want to say thank you, Mayor and Commissioners, for allowing me to tell my story. My name is Sherelle Rosalie Anderson. I'm a gang outreach worker for the city of Gresham now, but I was the city of Portland. At first Home Forward denied me. They said because I had a charge from 12 years ago. I have 2 felonies. I didn't know what I was doing, so I agreed to whatever they had given me. I at first was okay, accepted a job, worked 7 years at that job, but then I had my 3 daughters. Went through DV and still was not getting no help. So I met with the Community Law Division at the Metropolitan and told them my story. I had been the one person who had no charges, no problems, had worked in the community doing what I do, trying to help youth not fall in the same footsteps as me, but I still was facing every barrier as them, like if I had just committed a crime. So working with them, they fought, they got all of my fines dismissed. They have showed me that it's not my past that defines me, but who I am today. So I'm very grateful for them and Home Forward for giving me the opportunity to be able to be here today.
Thank you. And since I believe our paths may have crossed a long time ago, it was nearly a decade ago, I pushed forward the ban the box strategy of Multnomah County. And I was lucky I had a form of government that's different than here, and I could just sign an executive order, which I did. And the reason I did it was because of our gang outreach workers. I actually wanted people who could go into the community and speak to young people with a degree of experience and personal connection. And so, ironically, I saw them as superior in that role. And I wanted to make sure that we weren't squeezing people out who actually could bring that personal experience and the benefit of hindsight to the role. So I'm really appreciative of your being here today to share the continuation of that story and how it continues to have an impact well beyond your history. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir.
So Home Forward went to ban the box many, many years ago as well. And right now in our public housing, we have the ability to house people that have criminal backgrounds, but we wanted to be sure that folks could leave our housing and find housing elsewhere and be able to secure jobs. We're hoping at some point in time we can address reentry housing, second chances across our whole portfolio.
By the way, Betty, I just want to say that the city of Portland also has, you know, it did ban the box, but
yes,
we did it the Portland way, which is with 5 votes on the council, not with an executive order.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner. So now it's my pleasure to introduce this handsome gentleman at the end. This is Ethan. Ethan and his teenage daughter received rent assistance through the Housing Choice Voucher Program. He engaged in the Record Relief and Expungement Partnership when his criminal record from his past was impacting his ability to successfully find housing with the voucher, even with the voucher. Ethan, thank you also for your time today and your willingness to tell your story.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners.
Thank you.
My story entails I sit here as an African-American male with disabilities, mental and physical disabilities. So I've seen quite a bit of all these kinds of racisms, but my story ends and it has a happy ending. And so it first started in another county, which I have had an advocate speaking with me and speaking for me, but when it was time for me to show up, they wanted to raise the rent, so I couldn't get the housing. We had an attorney intervene. I ended up getting the housing, which didn't stop them from coming in and doing inspections twice a month. And then so we decided to leave that county. We came here. Home Forward was blessed us enough, me and my child, enough to give us a voucher to find a home. I filed an application with one app. It's one app. And so they gave me a free copy of my background check. And when I looked at my background check, I had a felony in 1997. And so that was over 20 years ago. And it said the sentencing date on it, 2006, 2001, 2011. So a person who is not educated in law would look at it and said, well, he's been in jail, he's been in trouble, he's been to prison, or all these different things. If they didn't know how to read it, they're like, I'm not gonna mess with him. So then I applied for an apartment. I was denied because of my background check. Then I applied for another apartment through Home Forward, and I contacted my Home Forward worker, and she told me, she gave me the number to the Multnomah, the Metropolitan Public Defender's Community Law Division. And so I called them, and the attorney there called the next apartment that I applied for, and they denied me again. And so when she called them and she explained them that, hey, he doesn't have anything on his record, he fits all your criteria, there's no reason for you to deny him. And they ended up giving me and my daughter the apartment. And my daughter's a straight A student. She's back. Right. You know, she's a brilliant, lovely young lady. And she's back in the school. She's in a high school with her friends. And now she can be able to prosper. And with a person with mental health and physical health disabilities, plus background limitations, that if it wasn't for Home Forward and the Metropolitan Public Defender's Office, we would be homeless right now. So I want to thank Home Forward and the City Council, and I didn't even know that you guys had a Fair Housing 50th anniversary, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you guys so much.
I think it's pretty clear how the program is benefiting people, but I just wanted to add one last thing. It also helps to reunify families. Frequently, you'll have a parent in a unit with children, and the other parent comes out and has a record, and they cannot live in the same dwelling. So that's a big, huge benefit of this program. And as you said, keeping families and parents and children together is really important. Thank you.
Commissioner Fritz.
Councillor Dominguez,
Yes.
I believe you now represent District 2 in Metro, is that correct?
I'm sorry, say again?
You're the Metro Councillor for District 2?
I am, yes, thank you.
I'm very happy that I'm one of your constituents. Colleagues, I want you to know that I've been serving with Councillor Dominguez on the Metro Policy Advisory Committee, which I think you were on at one time, weren't you?
I was, many years ago,
yes,
yes.
as a citizen representative.
Well, when I was the citizen rep, I could vote. Now as a councillor, I can't, so.
So I just wanted to thank you publicly for all of your citizen volunteering, and I'm really honoured that you're now representing me on the Metro Council.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Yeah, we're delighted. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate it very, very much.
And finally, today, I'd like to bring back Alan Laza, who's going to talk about the Fair Housing Poster Contest and introduce our poster contest winners.
Here he comes.
All right, sorry about
Welcome
that.
back.
There, talking to the young folks.
Great.
Well, like I said, this is one of my favorite days to come here and be with all you folks. It is the day we do the Fair Housing Month Proclamation, and then we bring you our poster contest awardees. I'm also going to call up my colleague Ed Washington, who's going to say a few words before, as I also bring up the poster contest winners. So we've got 3 of our young artists with us here today. So come on up here, Lydia, Kobe, and Misha.
Welcome. Welcome to Portland City Hall. All right.
They are all extraordinarily excited to be here. I think because they got to miss school, but just venturing a guess. Ed, go ahead and give us a few words. We've talked a lot about the past, heard from some renters today about the present. My sense is that Ed's going to talk more about the past, and then we are going to move on to the future of fair housing with these young artists.
Commissioners and Mayor Wheeler, Ed Washington. I was asked just to, I guess it's sort of like baseball, sort of a cleanup batter or something like that. But I just want to just chat a little bit about, in listening to all of the housing. My family moved here in 1944, and we came from Birmingham, Alabama. And when we got here, we lived in Vanport. We lived in Vanport from 1944 up to and through the flood of 1948. And in 1948, after the flood, it was quite a journey for my family. We spent the first 3 months after the flood living on Swan Island, and by late fall of 1948, we moved out into the Northwest Industrial area, where we lived in trailers for that horrible winter of 1948, 1949, and I'm sure there's none of you here that would remember that but myself, but it was cold. And then we were able to find an apartment up on North Interstate, close to where the Portland School District office is located today, and then from there we moved back to Swan Island in early 1950, and by the fall of 1950, my family was able to find a house on Northeast Cook Street between present-day Martin Luther King Boulevard and Northeast 7th Avenue, close to Irving Park. And there was not the rules that would allow us to live wherever we wanted to then. There were very, very few African Americans east of Northeast 7th Avenue. I mean, very few. And most of them, I knew them because we all attended Irvington Grade School, and there were not that many of us there. after that, we stayed there, and that's where we got pretty much settled in. But I got married in 1959, and my wife and I were looking for an apartment in 1961. And these were apartments up on Alberta between Vancouver Avenue and I think it's Garfield or Gantenbein Street. And I went up there, we went there to check out the apartments, and the owner said, yes, we have an apartment. And we asked her, so how much is it? And she said, well, it's going to be $85 a month. Well, back then, I had enough sense to know that a good apartment was anywhere from $40 to $55 a month. So I had a very good friend who was an attorney, young man who has since passed on. His name was Ralph Cake Jr., and he was a white gentleman. I said, Ralph, I want you to go there and find out what it really is supposed to cost. And so Ralph went there, and then we would get back together. And so we got back together the next day, and he said, Ed, he says, I can get the apartment for $55 a month. And I said, let's pay them a visit. So Ralph and I went over, and the way we set it up, Ralph went first, and I sort of laid back in the stairwell listening, and Ralph went on to say that the lady greeted him. She says, oh, I'm so happy to see you back. And he says, is that apartment still $55? She says, oh, absolutely, absolutely. He says, nothing else? She says, no. He said, you know, I don't understand. He said, I have a very good friend. You may remember him. His name is Ed Washington, and he came by here, and you quoted him $85 a month. He said, something's wrong with that. And he said, well, just a minute, I'm going to call Ed. And so I was back in the stairwell, and I came up. And I tell you, we got the apartment, but the most gratifying thing was to catch a person discriminating against you. And yes, we won the victory, but I'm telling you, you carry those scars for the rest of your life. And every time I would go anywhere to buy a house, that past still stays with me. So I'm so pleased with the work that Alan and all of the housing advocates are doing. And you know, it's, I just turned 81 a couple of months ago, I guess. And you know, I hope that in the next 70 years that this conversation will be different. It's about time we get beyond this foolishness. So that's all I wanted to say, and thank you very much.
Mr. Washington, thank you very much. And frankly, it's because of the courage of people like you and the persistence of people like you that we're able to be here today showing progress. And these young kids are going to be inspired by what you've said today, and that vision that you just put on the table that someday this is behind us. I think that can be the case. So thank you for being here. Thanks for your leadership, and thank you for sharing it with the next generation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ed. It is a special day when I get to sit and listen to the stories of Ed Washington, which is often but not enough. Thanks for coming today, Ed.
Could I just add, though, that Mr. Washington, it shouldn't be this way, and we haven't made nearly as much progress as we would have hoped. And so I just want to acknowledge that, and also with the mayor, join with him in saying thank you for your leadership. And I don't know about inspiring the children, but you inspired me, and thank you for what you've done for us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. So on to the future. Thank you so much to these young artists who this year entered the Fair Housing Poster Contest, whose theme was Fair Housing Lives in Oregon. This is the grand prize awardee, and it is by Misha, to my right. Misha, I'll have you hold that. Misha comes to us from Newburgh, and then we also have a couple of young folks who are from our community right here in Portland. Lydia Hall, who is from Irvington Grade School in the 8th grade, middle school, okay, right. In the 8th grade. And Kobe Chen, who is 8, and that Arleta, and is in the 3rd grade.
All right, Kobe.
So these young artists signed posters for all of you, and so I'll have them come up and hand those out to you.
Oh, that's great.
Oh, there you go. You can give these.
Hello, thank you.
Congratulations. Congratulations. Kobe, come on over here, man. Good job. Nicely done.
Yeah, congratulations. Best job.
That's fantastic.
Thank you so much, Lydia, Kobe, and Misha. And I think that we wanted to take a few minutes and get some photos with the young folks also.
Great.
And with our other young folk, Ed.
Very good. Should we just come down here in front to do
Yeah, I
this?
think, yeah, and then Misha can hold his poster. Let's see, where is there enough room?
Alan, let's go back.
You want to get back there? Okay. Kids, why don't you go back there, young people, and Misha, you want to hold up your poster? Stand right up in the front. Yeah, oh yeah, let's have one of these. You make me look tall. Yes, what's the whole proclamation? Careful, the simple prize is 10, so don't drop it.
That's a great idea.
I'll stand with him.
So awesome.
All right, guys, ready? 1, 2, 3.
So we need to sign any forms to give you guys excuses. The mayor to sign a proclamation, giving the afternoon off here.
Great, thank you. Parents, thank you too. Congratulations. Raising great kids. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Washington. So good to see you. Good to see you. See you. Good stuff. Thanks, Kobe. That's great.
So with that, we wanted to thank you for inviting us to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act with the proclamation and today's events. And so for everyone who came to hear and participate, thank you very much for joining us today. So thank you.
Well done. Thank you, everybody. All right, next up are items 348 and 49. Is it not 3:30? Oh, Commissioner Fritz is right. Why don't we take a 10-minute break? We'll reconvene at 3:30.
If the folks that came to the presentation could meet us in the laboratory room.
session. Carla, could you please read items 348 and 349?
348, amend the transportation system plan consistent with the 2035 comprehensive plan and in compliance with the regional transportation plan, amend River District Master Street Plan, add policies for automated vehicles, adopt findings of compliance, adopt corrections, amend transportation and parking demand management code to clarify requirements. And 349, amend the transportation system plan to update introduction, modal plans, implementation strategies, and glossary.
Very good. And before I turn this over to Commissioner Saltzman, could I get a clarification from legal counsel? Are these both first readings?
No, all of these items have previously
been continued?
They're continued, yes.
Okay, so on items 348 and 349, is the intention that we will actually take votes on these today?
Yes, on the final or the amendments?
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay.
I just want to make sure procedurally I get this straight.
It's
And-
my
and we will
understanding
have
procedurally that you'll vote on the amendment. Sorry, I'm Courtney Duke with the Bureau of Transportation.
Thanks, Courtney.
That you will vote on the amendment and vote on the full package as your first vote, and you'd have your second vote in May.
So so let's clarify. I think that means you've had a motion and second on these amendments before.
Correct.
Had the record open to allow people to give testimony. Council will vote on the amendments, which then means you need at least a 5-day period before you can take a vote on the package. So that comes back
assuming
on.
we have amendments, then we will move them to second reading as amended. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Just want to make sure I had that straight.
Mayor, can I? Twist though in that
What? There's a twist.
staff has a amendment to my amendment, so I don't know whether we have to then.
I think if it pertains to the same topic and it's responding to whatever information and testimony, I think it's fine for you to vote on those amendments today. And then you could take the final vote on the package when it comes back.
Sounds good.
Very good.
Thanks
And
so
do
much.
we take testimony on the amendments that are being offered today, or is the record closed?
I think you could. The
Record's
record is closed. The
closed,
record is closed. And again, if the amendments are responding to the testimony and the conversation that's already heard,
I
I
believe
don't
that
think
is
you
the case.
necessarily need to take any additional testimony.
Great, very good. Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. Sorry, Commissioner Saltzman, thank you for your patience.
Well, thanks. We're revisiting the Transportation Systems Plan. I'll turn it over to Courtney Duke. I
Great,
do have an
thanks.
amendment I want to offer at the appropriate point concerning Lincoln High School superblock development.
Okay, so I think that's a part of Central City 2035, not the TSP. Is that correct?
Correct, and that's a time certain at 4:30.
At 4:30.
Oh, okay, that's right. I forgot
I
about
was
it.
confused too.
Yeah.
Okay, so just so both of the commissioners know, I gathered a couple of copies of that, and we'll give them to the 2035 staff when they appear in the room. So.
We do look interchangeable, I know, but.
Mayor, can I ask a procedural question?
Yeah, Commissioner Fish, you bet.
So I'm delighted we're getting to some votes here. It seems like we've been building to this moment, and today we actually get to cast some votes. I have a 4:30 absence, but it also says that Central City 2035 is only requesting 15 minutes. Is that true?
At this point, it's a very limited set of, mostly you're wrapping up pieces of, or I guess amendments that you considered at your last hearing, so mostly should be relatively quick.
Okay.
There's, as you've seen, there's
Okay.
one other amendment
Yeah.
on the table. It looks fairly simple, so I'm sure it will go fairly quick.
All right, so Mayor, I'm going to try to push off that just a little bit because I want to make sure that we have a full council to vote on those amendments.
Very good. All right, so let's move forward on 348 and 349.
So again, I'm Courtney Duke with the Bureau of Transportation, project manager for the TSP, and you're looking at TSP 3, which is the final stage of the Transportation System Plan update and its components of the comprehensive plan. So again, we're here today to look at the amendment, to vote on the amendments that Commissioner Fritz proposed, and we had some minor changes to that as from staff. So we're just looking for any discussion that you have on that, and then the first vote. Is that right, Lindley? Did I say that right?
So the sheet I got from your staff shows 3 amendments.
Correct.
One to policy 9XAA, 9XAB, 9XAD. correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so maybe you can take them all three together, or you can take them one at a time.
But to review, colleagues, this was to the Connected and Autonomous Vehicles, Section 8, and we did discuss it last time. One was to add supporting and encouraging use of public transportation. One was to add, this includes people with disabilities as well as communities of colour, women and geographically underserved communities. And then the final one is the one that requires a slight amendment, which would now read, require adequate insurance coverage for operators, customers, and the public at large by providers of commercial, connected, and autonomous vehicle services. So staff's suggestion is to add commercial services.
So this would be, and if I understood you, you had 9XAA, 9XAB, and did you say 9XAC?
It's a D.
D is in dog. So this would be an amendment to 9XAD, is that correct?
There's an amendment to 9XB. F.
So what I have for the one that Commissioner Fritz just mentioned, that is 9XAA, that has to do with the insurance coverage.
I don't know.
We need a second on that amendment? I'll second that amendment.
Yeah.
So we have a second, Commissioner Fritz's amendment, which includes commercial insurance, and that is an amendment to 9XAA.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. We're in business.
I think somebody's going to explain why it's no
Mayor,
longer
Commissioner,
AA.
just a suggested, I'm Peter Hurley with the Bureau of Transportation. The policy as written, there's an explicit tools section, and we feel that the language here, which entirely appropriate, fits well within the tools section, which is 9XB sub F. And so that if you look at the policy, there are A through E tools that are essentially outlining how we would implement the policy. This would fit appropriately within that if it's...
No, I would prefer to have it in the policy. So I'd like to keep it in AA rather than back in the tools, please.
Very good. So we have a motion and a second for an amendment to 9XAA. Is there any further discussion? Could you call the roll, please, Carla, on the amendment to 9XAA?
Fish.
Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Udaly.
Aye.
Fritz.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. So that is the amendment to 9XAA. So now the question pertains to the amendments themselves, including 9XAA, which has now been amended.
Correct.
Shall we take all three of them as a package?
That's fine with me.
I have no objection. Very good. We will consider 9XAA, 9XAB, and 9XAE.
D.
D, I am sorry, D as in dog. Those will now be a package. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Fish.
Well, I appreciate these amendments, and at the risk of beating a dead horse, I just want to restate that my view is that we are poised to have a big conversation about the extent to which the city regulates and participates in this emerging technology of autonomous vehicles. Clearly, those of us, for those of us who read the headlines, there have been some glitches in some of the tests that are being done around the country. I have received some fairly terse emails from people accusing me of being somewhere between a Luddite and a Neanderthal for raising some concerns here. And I just want to be very clear. I am not personally opposed to the march of technology. I just think that we first have to have a conversation about what the framework is, the policies, and our priorities before we back into anything, particularly something that has as far-ranging in consequences as this technology is. So that's been the consistent theme of my concerns, is that essentially we not put the cart before the horse, and that we carefully think through what it means to be a city that allows autonomous vehicles. As is pointed out in one of our prior hearings, maybe by Chris Smith, it may be that Congress preempts us altogether from having this conversation, which I guess they technically have the right to do, although I hope they don't. Anyway, I appreciate these amendments, and I'm pleased to vote aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Udaly.
Aye.
Fritz.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Fish, for your partnership on this issue. I want to make sure the Council knows that I already also submitted similar amendments to the Metro Policy Advisory Committee so that Metro's policy reflects this. I think it's very clear this technology is coming. How we allow it to happen and when and whether are questions which I believe are entirely within the purview of the City Council, and not only that, but our responsibility to make sure that these vehicles are safe for passengers and other users of the right-of-way. I think we're going to need to change what you just said at the beginning about beating a dead horse to smacking an autonomous vehicle, because it's really kind of similar, is that somebody's got to take some responsibility at some point. Aye.
Wheeler.
So there are two things that come to mind. The first is yesterday's testimony of Mark Zuckerberg in front of the U.S. Senate, and it was really apparent. It was interesting, the parts I saw, but the main headline after that was that the folks in the U.S. Senate, despite their good intentions, really didn't have any clue how Facebook actually worked, despite the fact that it's been around for a long, long time. And so there they were, on the cusp of proposing a regulatory framework, and then they realized, wow, we don't even understand what it is we are trying to regulate. That's sort of the first thing that comes to mind. The second thing that comes to mind is what Commissioner Fritz just alluded to, which is our responsibility to try and stay ahead of the technology and anticipate what problems could exist in the community for the people who live here. It's not that we have any objection to the technology per se or concerned about the technology per se. And in fact, I aggressively embrace it. I think there's a lot of phenomenal potential here, but we do have this responsibility to the people we represent to make sure that basic requirements that government typically imposes around safety, around insurance requirements, around qualifications, those things have to be met, just as we do with the current transportation framework. So I think this is a really good first step. I support it. Thanks for everybody who's been working so hard on it. I vote aye. The package of amendments as amended has been adopted. So does that complete our work on 348 and 49, or is there more we need to do? It does,
and we should just mention that this comes back to council for the final vote on May 24th, correct?
Can I confirm that they actually voted for the whole package?
No, I don't think we already voted on the amendments.
They can't, because they've made amendments to it. So
So
it
we're
comes
moving
back
it.
for the
Yeah,
vote
we're moving
on
it.
the May 24th.
Okay, sorry.
Afternoon time.
Okay, so we effectively will take a second reading on May 4th. Is that correct?
So May 24th,
May 24th,
you're going to
I'm
have a really
sorry.
fun day
Having
with a
trouble
lot
seeing
of
you.
things where you are getting complete packages that reflect all of the amendments you've made to all of these different documents. They're all coming back, and you'll essentially have a version that shows strike through, underline of all the changes in all these
Right.
packages, and you'll vote on that, and then you'll have the second reading that comes back.
Very
Yes.
good. And does that have to be assigned to time certain?
I believe it already is, Carla. I'm pretty sure it's set for 2 p.m. time certain on the 24th for everything.
Correct, 2 p.m. on the 24th.
Okay.
All right, it'll be a nail biter. Be there.
All right, thank you so much.
You bet. Next,
Thank
we
you.
have items 350 and 351. Those are also to be read together.
Item 350, amend zoning regulations to implement the 2035 comprehensive plan through the Code Reconciliation Project. And 351, amend tree, noise, and sign regulations to effectively implement Portland City Code through the Code Reconciliation Project.
All right, good. So as you just heard, this is to discuss testimony received on the Code Reconciliation Project and consider several amendments. Carla's read the item. We have BPS staff, including Eric Engstrom and Barry Manning, to come up and introduce the session. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners, Mayor Wheeler. My name is Eric Engstrom. I manage the Comprehensive Planning Group at the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. My role in this last few items has been just to orient you once again that this is one of the several items along with the last item that's helping us wrap up loose ends to implement the new comprehensive plan on May 24th. So like that last item, this one will get its final reading on May 24th. We're one step earlier in the process with this, which is that you've had hearings and heard testimony, and this is your first time to discuss what amendments you want to have on the table with this. So I will turn it over to Barry to go over what we have so far.
Great. Thanks, Eric. Barry Manning, planning staff. Good afternoon, commissioners. Mayor Wheeler. So I'm just going to cover where we've been and what we have on the table today and see if we can move forward. City Council held a hearing on the Planning and Sustainability Commission's recommended draft of the Code Reconciliation Project back on March 21st. And as you'll recall, at the March 21st hearing, staff proposed a packet of additional amendments for your consideration. On that date, you moved and seconded to include those in the package for consideration. And then City Council held a public hearing. We had about 9 folks testify orally on a variety of topics, but much of it on removal of a buffer overlay zone, if you'll recall, on a property on St. Helens Road. And then we've also received over 50 pieces of written testimony, a large majority of that testimony about the buffer overlay, either in the form of individual emails or a petition that was included in that package. So in response to all of that, staff prepared a memo to council dated on 4/3/18, summarizing the public testimony. We related 6 themes. And as I just mentioned, we had a significant amount of testimony. The majority of that testimony was regarding that buffer overlay zone, particularly as it applied to 2425 St. Helens Road. But we also had some additional requests in that testimony, and I'm just going to enumerate those now. There was a request to change the FAR on a property at 2525 Northwest Lovejoy to 4:1 on the zoning maps. There was a request to amend the parking code regulations. There was a request to allow use of community design standards for buildings that were exercising an option for additional 5 feet for taller ground floors, which would allow buildings to be 60 feet high using design standards. There was a request to reduce the residential buffer or setback as staff has interpreted that request. And then finally, there was a testimony to support the self-service storage amendments that were included in the packet. And in that 4/3 memo, staff forwarded the council some recommendations about those testimony requests. We were supportive of relooking at the buffer and reconsidering that. We felt the other requests were discussed pretty significantly during the comprehensive plan process and probably required additional study before we wanted to move forward on any of those, so we weren't supporting those. But certainly would be interested in hearing council's discussion on those topics. So with that, staff forwarded a second amendment memo to you all on 4/10, which was just yesterday. And I have that here. And I think Carla may have passed that out, or maybe she's passing it out now, but you should have received that via email from us. And that memo contains several additional amendments, including one that we understand will be proposed regarding the buffer overlay from Commissioner Fritz, and several additional staff proposed amendments that are, again, more technical in nature. And I've got a really short PowerPoint that I can show you to outline what those additional amendments are. All right. So with that, I'll just walk through this. Again, why we're doing the project, we're reconciling zoning and other city codes with the 2035 adopted plan implementation package. We're really focusing on cleaning up redundancies, fixing cross-references, and fine-tuning where we can. The package is largely technical, but there are some changes that do have development implications. As I mentioned before, there are 4 titles affected, 33 planning and zoning, then also 11 trees, 18 noise control, and 32 signs and related regulations. And the amendments that we have on the table affect 33 and 32 today, potentially. So the first one, I believe Commissioner Fritz will be sponsoring, really deals with the buffer overlay zone. And I will defer to the commissioner to introduce that, but our understanding of the recommendation will be parallel to the action that council took preliminarily on the buffer overlay zone map project last week, which would be to retain the buffer overlay not only on the map as you did last week, but also in the code, so that there's a code to support that buffer overlay. And then there was a testimony on a related regulation in the sign code that related to limitations on signs in the buffer overlay that we would also say that should, if we're going to move in that direction, we'd want to make that parallel amendment as well. And then for staff amendments, we have several other minor technical changes. I'll run through them really quickly. In the Chapter 120, which deals with multi-dwelling, we've got several maps, 120-6, 127, 128, and 12010, that are being changed to correspond to the new zoning designations that were adopted. If you'd like to look at those maps, I have those as resource slides, and we can look at them. They were in the packet if you'd like to look at them further. That's items 3 through 6 in the memo. One that's more significant and is worth talking about a little bit here, it relates to the affordable commercial bonus, which we talked about at the last meeting. This bonus offers additional floor area and height for projects that provide affordable commercial space, and Prosper Portland is working on administrative rules and will be the administrator of this bonus. And what we're doing here is amending a section of the zoning code to clarify for implementation how the affordable commercial bonus would work vis-a-vis the inclusionary housing bonus, which is also in the code, so that there's some clarity about what types of projects would access bonuses through which avenue. And the proposal is that in the code of 100 projects that were 100% residential, but weren't triggering IH because they're not hitting that 20 units threshold, would go to the inclusionary housing program and either build housing units or make a contribution to the affordable housing fund in order to gain additional FAR. So clearly, if you're a housing project, you were going to the housing funds or building the housing on site. For non-residential projects, for projects that are 100% commercial and contain no residential units, the proposal is that those projects would first access the affordable commercial space on site or pay into an affordable commercial fund to access part of the FAR. Now, the affordable commercial bonus only allows half of the maximum FAR, so if a project wanted to utilize the full floor area allowed on the site, they would have to actually use affordable commercial and affordable housing opportunity to get there. And then finally, for mixed-use projects, so these projects would include residential and commercial, that would like to gain bonus floor area, they can do so by either providing voluntary affordable housing units on site, by building on-site affordable commercial space, or by first making a payment to the affordable commercial fund up to the maximum limit that they can, which again is half of the maximum, and then turning to the housing fund for the rest of that. And the other clarification here is that we're clarifying in the code that the affordable commercial space bonus, as it's structured right now, if you build space on site, the return is 2 square feet of bonus floor area for every 1 square foot of space provided. There's a slight incentive to provide it on site, much like the housing is structured to provide an incentive to do it on site. But clarifying that if you're purchasing floor area via the affordable commercial space fund, the ratio is 1 square foot per the dollar figure. And those figures are preliminarily set to be the same as the affordable housing figures administered by the Portland Housing Bureau.
So everything Barry just talked about is a situation where you're below the thresholds for being required to do the mandatory inclusionary housing, but you want to gain additional FAR through paying into one of the other funds.
This is all the voluntary side of the program. And it's our understanding, as my memo indicated, that housing and Prosper Portland have had conversations about this, and they're in agreement about the way that that allocation would work, at least between the two bureaus.
So they're both supportive?
They are both supportive, yes. The next amendment we're proposing is to map 426, which is the Gateway Plan District area, and there was a slight error in the way the map boundary was drawn, so we're updating that to this particular design overlay map to make it conform to the new zoning, more of a technical thing. We found an item we had overlooked in the Hayden Island Plan District. This is item 10. We're amending a section of that code that made reference to an allowance for drive-through developments in a certain part of the island that is currently zoned neighborhood commercial 2. That zoning is being changed to commercial mixed use 1. And what this amendment would do is carry forward that allowance for drive-throughs in that area that exists today. And finally, we're making several amendments to the plan development chapter, which is 33854, in its application for use with a commercial mixed use bonus. And if you recall, this bonus allows additional height and utilization of the floor area on large sites when they go through a plan development that has a design review component. And the amendments we're making after discussions with PBOT and BDS staff are to delete a transportation impact study requirement. There's no directly relatable approval criterion for this particular review, so we found that that was an inappropriate application requirement. We're removing reference to a connectivity requirement. It's noted in this subsection. It proved confusing because the city has other connectivity requirements in other sections of the code that people will relate to, so this was somewhat redundant. And then finally, we're just clarifying a regulation about when modifications and adjustments can be used. And I think that's all the slides I've got. Oh, the last two slides I'm just reviewing. Again, March 21st, you all considered several amendments that we had on the table in that package, and I just have them here for your reference if you need to refer back to them for some reason. So the next steps here, we're looking to have City Council move and second these amendments as appropriate, and then we'll come back and we can talk about next steps later, but we'll be preparing an as amended document and coming back to you for votes later on in the month.
All right, very good. Why don't we start with Commissioner Fritz? I know that she wants to make at least 2 amendments. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you, Mayor.
Very good.
So the first 2 amendments are to hold off on doing the buffer changes. We heard a lot of testimony from Willamette Heights, and certainly they made a compelling case for their particular location. It seems to me likely that there are, if we were to look in detail at all the other sites where the buffer was being removed, there might be similar concerns, perhaps from neighbours who weren't necessarily either paying attention or able to come into the public hearing process. So it seems to me wise that we basically keep the buffer as is, both on the map and in the code, in the regulations in Title 32 and in 33. And so I am moving that we amend the recommendation, remove the deletion of 33.410, retain the buffer overlay zone in the zoning code, and amend the recommendation to remove the deletion and retain the related buffer overlay regulations in Title 32 and renumber the sections as shown.
Second.
We have a motion for Commissioner Fritz. We have a second from Commissioner Fish. All right.
Mayor, can I propose that the staff, unless there's objection, that the staff proposed amendments be considered as a package?
I actually have a question about one of them. Or
can we take that one out and just vote on the rest?
That sounds fine to me.
Yeah, but just do this like without objection, just
all right,
whatever.
Very good. Can we get a motion in a second to incorporate
which one do you want to drop?
The one about the affordable commercial space.
Can I get the
number?
number?
That's number 7.
Number 7. So, Mayor, I move staff propose amendments 3 through 6 and 8 through 13 as a package.
As a package. We have a second. Is there any discussion?
That's all we need now.
Okay, very good. And are there any other topics from the testimony that commissioners wish to discuss or additional amendments?
7.
So shall I talk about 7 now?
Yep.
Thank you. So we had a very thoughtful letter from the Planning and Sustainability Commission dated April 5th that we were emailed that says that they agree with this proposal, but they do have some significant concerns. And the one that called out to me, some Planning and Sustainability Commission members were uncomfortable with the idea of making fee in lieu payments available as an option for voluntary programs to boost floor area ratio. They questioned why funds raised in this matter based on an in lieu payment would be sole sourced to a particular city bureau when there might be alternative uses for such funds that would more directly mitigate impacts of the allowed floor area ratio, for instance, parking management program, street trees, or whatever. It just kind of called out to me that for the inclusionary housing, we have the Housing Bureau that has an affordable housing bond that is in charge of looking at how do we do affordable housing. And so it's clear for that the in lieu is going to then benefit affordable housing. For this commercial program, we don't have a mechanism currently for Prosper Portland to find other alternative spaces. And so basically what developers who would be buying this, using this payment, they would just basically be paying for extra floor area ratio.
The funds, our understanding through the program that Prosper has worked on is that the funds would be dedicated to a particular program that is involved in affordable commercial space, both in urban renewal districts, and this new resource would allow them to do some projects outside with this funding. So it would be a dedicated to a particular program that would end up being spent on affordable commercial space.
And if I can add, my understanding is that Prosper staff will be coming to City Council with a presentation and a briefing on their program within the next month or so. They're supposed to be here in early May.
Might address my concerns then. Okay. So the Planning Sustainability Commission recommends that the Council adopt the Affordable Commercial Space Bonus Amendments and that we further review and work with staff to amend the code and administrative rules to better address the concerns outlined above. So perhaps, I don't know what the vehicle is, Mayor, for you bringing the Prosper Portland program, something related to coming back with a report on how this is working out, making sure that the amount of staff, the implementation cost again is called out, that staff costs of designing, implementing and monitoring this program could be large compared with its benefit. So those are the concerns I have. I'm willing to move it forward. I know we're trying to look at different ways to do things. I just want to make sure that we don't open up the door to people basically buying FAR and then not getting commercial affordable space from it.
And our expectation is there will be a program very similar to, again, as Eric said, the housing program that supports that space. And I'm just going to look around really quick to see if my colleague from Prosper Portland is in the audience and might be able to speak. She had a conflict with the commission meeting right now.
We don't have that as yet, or at least
I think the comment is well taken. We acknowledge that this is an experimental bonus idea, and so it deserves to be monitored and appropriately, because we don't know if it's going to work.
So I didn't hear anything in Commissioner Fritz's statement on the record that concerns me. Did you? I didn't hear anything that doesn't sound like Prosper Portland couldn't do it.
No, I think the issue will be with their administrative rules and how much certainty they have there. The code that we're talking about today doesn't really get into that detail.
And, you know, without having had the presentation yet, I don't know how much money we're talking about here. Is there going to be enough to actually make a difference, or are we basically telling more affluent developers you can buy your way up?
Mm-hmm. Two comments, if I could. One is that I'm a very strong supporter of this idea of an affordable commercial space fund. It's desperately needed, and I love the idea that we'd have as much flexibility as possible to spend outside of urban renewal districts. So let's make sure that it's real. Let's make sure that the money goes to a good purpose. I have a little concern with the preamble to the letter you read, Commissioner Fritz, about flexibility to use those funds for other on-site purposes like trees or mitigation of some kind. We have a crisis in the affordable residential and commercial space, and this is one tool that I think offers some promise. So I'd be inclined to keep the funds segregated for this fund, but I also would want the Prosper Portland to report to us so we make sure that it's accountable.
Yeah, I'm just reading what the Planning Sustainability Commission, who many of them are developers who know far more about this than I do, this was a concern that they noted, and then it's about the increase in floor area ratio and what the impact of that is. So with all of these planning issues, it's all supposed to fit together and work together well. And so, as I say, I'm willing to move it forward as a pilot project, and I would be looking to, when the mayor brings forward the Prosper Portland program, having something in there that says, look at what the planning sustainability have concerns about, not to say that we necessarily are going to agree with all of them, just let's consider it in a thoughtful manner moving forward.
All right, so Commissioner Fritz, it sounds like we are ready then to take a motion in a second on item number 7.
So I move that we add 7 with that stated on the legend.
So we have a motion from Commissioner Fritz.
Second.
And a second from Commissioner Fish on the language as stated on the record. Very good. Okay, so tell us about next steps. I think we completed the business we need to on 350 and 351.
I think so. Yes. So
nope.
Our intention is to wrap all of these amendments that you have considered into an as-amended document, which we will submit back to council, possibly a substitute ordinance if that's necessary. We'll check with the city attorney's office to make sure how that goes together. And bring that back to you for, I guess, what would be considered your first vote, first action on it on April 25th, at the same time or right after the map refinement project comes back to you for consideration.
Yeah, I think at that point, I'm looking at Lyndon to make sure we get the right language, but we'd be bringing back substitute exhibits, and so they would simply receive those and then pass it to second reading at that time?
Yes, and we can talk about what those substitute exhibits are. Are you bringing back a substitute ordinance as well?
Yeah.
Okay, so then, yes, that will be a first reading because council will need to vote in the substitute ordinance and exhibits.
And it will reflect all the amendments that you've moved so far.
So we now have 15 minutes to pause before the next time certain?
20.
20?
Yeah, unfortunately, the next pool of items is a time certain.
And I guess we should just verify that I think we had, the 25th was the day that you're already coming back to hear the map package, and so we were going to put this on that agenda.
Okay.
Correct. You're in
Correct.
the 2 p.m. time certain slot.
Okay.
With map refinement.
So I do think that's our process, and after the 25th, we'll return for second reading, final votes on the 24th of May, along with all of these other projects that you're seeing.
All right, very good. So that concludes our business for a while. We'll come back at 4:30 for the time certains, items number 352, 355. We're in recess. session. This is a 4:30 time certain. Carla, could you please read items 352 through 355?
Yes, 352, adopt the Central City 2035 Plan, Volume 2A, Part 3, Environmental and Scenic, amend the Portland zoning map and Portland zoning codes for environmental overlay zones and scenic resource zones. 353, adopt the Central City 2035 Plan, amend the Comprehensive Plan map, Transportation System Plan, Willamette Greenway Plan, Willamette River Greenway Inventory, Scenic Resources Protection Plan, Zoning Map and Title 33. 354, Title 33, repeal and replace prior Central City plans and documents. 354, adopt the Central City 2035 Plan, action charts, performance targets, and urban design diagrams. And 355, adopt the Central 2035 Plan Green Loop Concept Report.
Very good, thank you. Sally, do you want to walk us through the last part of our session today, please?
Yes, I'd be happy to. So we have a few final amendments for you to vote on today. These are all items that were subject to the public hearing on either March 22nd or April 4th. We have one item related to access on public school sites in the Central City, some minor technical amendments related to North Pearl height, bird-safe glazing, and transfer of floor area from a historic resource. So once the council's work is complete today, staff will go back and prepare a Central City 2035 revised recommended draft to reflect the amendments that council has made over the last 8 months. The revised recommended draft will also include updated commentary to explain the final code and policy language and clean up any Scribner's errors that we might find. We will also update the ordinances and findings to reflect the council's amendments, and will release these documents in early to mid-May. Then on May 24th at 2:30 p.m., the same day the comprehensive plan takes effect, we will ask you to move and amend the Central City 2035 package to include this revised draft that we will be preparing, including the substitute ordinances and findings. And then on June 6th, you'll come back to take a final vote on the whole Central City 2035 plan. Following that, you'll hold a public hearing on the first iteration of 2 new administrative rules, one for low-carbon buildings and one for bird-safe glazing, and these are both needed to implement Central City 2035. And so while you will take the first vote on that, we'll be requesting that the BPS director be granted the authority to update these admin rules over time. After that, we'll conduct final training sessions, and so that staff is ready for the effective date of July 9th. So I think that's it on that. So we just have a few other things to do before we can move on to the rest.
All right, so the first, Commissioner Saltzman.
Well, I just want to check in, when's the appropriate time for me to offer an amendment concerning the school sites in the Central City?
I think that's the first item on the list.
It is indeed. Rachel, why don't you tee that up, please?
Oh, okay.
Sure. Thank you. Rachel Hoy with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. And so just to summarize, this is an amendment that exempts public school uses from the superblock regulations. Those regulations are intended to link internal walkways, plazas, to adjacent public sidewalks to improve circulation through a site and to an adjacent neighborhood. So the intent of the exemption from these regulations is to allow Portland Public Schools to design their school with open space and access ways and plazas in a way that addresses their programming needs, including safety and security needs. And our understanding is that PPS and PBOT are working on a memorandum of understanding right now, which will lay out the public access easements through the site.
Very good.
Yeah, and my amendment would simply state what you just stated more or less, Rachel, that it reads as follows. The council directs the Portland Bureau of Transportation to work with Portland Public School District on a memorandum of understanding for the redevelopment of the Lincoln High School property to ensure that specific programming needs for this facility are met and an adequate north-south public access connection is provided through the site that serves the day-to-day pedestrian and bicycle connectivity needs of Goose Hollow, consistent with the directives of the Central City 2035 plan. And I know Commissioner Fritz has an amendment, a friendly amendment to my amendment.
So I second yours.
Okay.
And just to change the wording on that a little bit to the direction would be that the Portland Bureau of Transportation to work with Portland Public Schools School District on a memorandum of understanding for the redevelopment of the Lincoln High property to ensure that specific programming and security needs for the facility are appropriately balanced with a north-south pedestrian access connection through the site that serves the pedestrian and bicycle connectivity needs of Goose Hollow, consistent with the directives of the Central City 2035 plan.
And I accept that as a friendly amendment.
Very good.
Thank
So
you.
we
So I
have a motion and a second.
I do have a question, though. I'm really concerned about this because I don't know what the mechanism to make sure this happens is. We were hoping, but by delaying for 3 weeks, the memorandum of understanding could have been signed and we would be sure about this. So is there another mechanism of, I mean, what happens if we don't do the exemption at all? Is there another mechanism for Portland Public Schools to come in and say later, here's our new plan, and we've got an MOU about how the connectivity is going to be maintained?
Do we have some people from Peabody here to?
Good afternoon, Kurt Kruger with Peabody Development Services. Commissioner Fritz, I appreciate your valid concerns. We'd hoped to have a memo of understanding prepared and signed here today. It's a pretty tall order for two large jurisdictions to accomplish in a short period of time. We're very close. We're working back and forth. There's some wording and some challenges that we are negotiating, but we have commitments from senior level management at PPS to keep working on this. If that were not to be signed, we also have city code, transportation code, that allows us to require connectivity through sites like this. So without the superblock regulations, we do have connectivity requirements that would need to be met in Title 17. They're just not as strong as they are with the language that had been proposed earlier.
Do you think you can get the memorandum of understanding signed by May 24th?
I think we can do that.
Then that would address our concerns, right? Because if it's not, then I, for one, would be looking to change our direction on this.
Kurt, can I ask you a question? What's the existing north-south public access connection through the Lincoln campus?
It's not necessarily memorialized. It's kind of a loose connection through fences that are open and around the track. It's not clear and distinct.
Well, I just, as someone who lives in the neighborhood, I would say that when the gate is closed to the field, I don't know that there is one.
No. Correct.
I don't think there's one that goes south unless you can somehow navigate through KGW, but I don't,
No.
am I right?
You can't.
Yeah. And so in the friendly amendment talks about programming and security needs. So I think that's a good addition because what we have heard from Lincoln High School that they have some legitimate security concerns about access to the campus and monitoring any right-of-way. Is that correct? Okay.
Very good. Were you going to say something, Sally?
I was just going to say that if this MOU is not signed, we will, by the time we release the substitute ordinance, we'll include this as a directive in the substitute ordinance.
Very good. And so I'm sorry, Commissioner Fritz?
I will be concerned. I don't want to put this out with there's no way that the City Council can require the memorandum of understanding to be signed after the Central City Plan is done. We lose our stick. So I would like to state my clear hope and expectation that it be finished so that we don't have to then figure out how to kick the can down the hall again.
Commissioner, if I may, playing through the land use application process that Lincoln High School will need to go through, they'll be going through a design review application. There's approval criteria that need to be met. Transportation will be applying connectivity requirements through Title 17. I don't want to forecast how the decision-making may occur, but City Council could ultimately be the decision maker in that land use case.
Okay. Just wants to set some clear expectations. Thank you.
Very good. So we need to take a vote on Commissioner Saltzman and Commissioner Fritz's amendment, correct?
So I think one is a friendly amendment, so
that's just, I assume, is absorbed into Commissioner Saltzman's amendment.
Yes, so you can vote on Commissioner Saltzman's. What it would do is, it's a directive to an ordinance. You're going to be getting a substitute ordinance on May 24th
Correct.
anyway.
Correct.
So it will be in there
Right,
if they
but
have
we
not done the
have,
MOU.
we have to actually vote on it today in order to move it in, is that correct?
Yes, either that or you're simply directing staff to put it in there. I think it's fine to vote.
Okay, why don't we do it just to keep it clean? Could you please call the roll, Carla?
Fish.
Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Fritz.
Commissioner Saltzman, thank you for your leadership on this. Aye.
Wheeler.
Thank you both for working on this. Dan, thank you, and Commissioner Fritz, thank you for the I think, improved friendly amendment. Aye.
So we still need a vote on the original
Correct.
amendment. Yep.
So please call the roll on the original amendment.
Sorry. Fish.
Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Fritz.
But for this, I would not be voting aye, but I am aye.
Wheeler.
Great.
Aye. So the amendment is adopted as amended. Thank you. Next, we move on to the minor and technical amendments that were the subject of the public hearings last week. That includes the North Pearl Height Opportunity Area, the bird-safe glazing, and the FAR transit transfer from historic resources. It would be my recommendation, unless any of my colleagues object, to vote on these as a package. Does anybody want to pull any of these for a separate discussion? Very good. Carla, please call the roll.
Fish.
Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Fritz.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. Package of amendments is adopted. That's it for today on Central City 2035. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, our next meeting will be May 24th.
May 24th it is. We are adjourned.
When is the party?
May 24th.
Okay.